Carrie, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you good, yeah. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. Yeah.
Now, would
I
you
can
like?
see I can see you, but I don't know whether you can see me.
I can't now, love.
Oh God. Technology, wonderful. Hang on a sec. Let me see if I can rectify that. No. Well, let's crack on.
I was going
And,
to say, don't worry about it. Don't worry at all about it. But
I love where you are. That looks really, really mad. I wish you could see mine because mine's equally as mad as your background. Is that your office?
it is, yeah. That's just the main rocks hub
Yeah,
where all the madness goes on.
yeah. That's good.
I'd like to start with your name, Thunderstick.
Okay.
Where did that come from?
It came from really me donning the mask for the first time. The reason I presume you know the background of why I had a mask and
Hello.
Cool. Okay, there we go. Right, good.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean. Very, very cool.
Yeah. So yeah, it came about because I found that at the time, and back in the late 70s, in the darkness of pre-gone days, drummers didn't get really much of a look in. There were exceptions to the rules, such as Keith Moon and John Bonham and people like that, obviously, that were quite extrovert, both in their playing and in the way they went around the kit. But bearing in mind that 1979, there was no anything such as we've got now, social media, etc. It was all just magazines. And in fact, it wasn't even magazines. It was just, rags, black and white.
It certainly was.
Such as Sounds and Melody Maker and New Musical Express, etc. And then suddenly they started actually putting in a few photos of bands. And then they started, when Kerrang came about, obviously they started putting posters within the magazine that you could put up. So it was always that drummers got a rough deal. You would see the guitarist pulling his poses and the singer down the front, and then you would see the top of somebody's head and a row of cymbals, and that would be the drummer. So thinking about this, I thought, what would be good if I created the faceless drummer. So that's exactly what I did. That's how it came about. And I couldn't call it Barry Graham Perkins. It had to have a name. So I thought somewhat descriptive of the way that I kind of throw myself into my playing, because I've never really had any kind of tuition, and I'm terrible on technique and rudiments and all the rest of it. I can't do them to save my life. I play from the heart, and
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, and I just go for it. And the name came about. It just was very descriptive for me, and that's what I called it, Thunderstick, and there it was.
And it worked.
I mean, it worked. Yeah,
I remember it. I remember. I think what was, I can't remember the single that you released years ago, and you was on.
Feel like rock and roll.
Probably was, yeah. And I was like, wow, who is the guy behind the mask?
Yeah.
So it did work. It really did work.
Yeah. I'm still broke though. it didn't work that well, did it? Really?
Right. That's rock and roll.
Yeah, I know. It is indeed.
We certainly don't do it for the money.
No, God. No.
You brushed swords with Iron Maiden, didn't you? In 1977 and 78, and you seem to have always, in the early days, particularly of Iron Maiden, you seem to be in orbit almost, and centrally involved somehow, because you were in Iron Maiden itself, and left in 1980, wasn't it? I believe.
No, I'd left way before then.
About 78, 79-ish.
No, you're still ahead of the time. 77, I was with Maiden.
Was it?
Oh. Yeah. And Yeah, I mean, Thunderstick didn't exist then. It was only little old me. And I wasn't in the band for that long, you know. It was a kind of work in progress for Steve.
Yeah.
And I kind of just moved on, and that was it. It was very strange the way it came about that I left. I never actually officially left, believe it or not, or I didn't get the sack either. It was just something that came about because the singer at the time, Dennis Wilcott, he kind of decided that he wasn't going to turn up for a couple of gigs and he wanted to leave. And I put a gig together in South London, and I was down there. I unpacked all my drums. I set them all up, waiting for the rest of the band to turn up. They turned up minus the singer. And now this is where it kind of gets hazy because I can't remember if we actually did the gig with Steve kind of muddling his way through singing the vocals for that night, or the way I remember it was that we sat around and had a drink, and it was kind of, that was it. You know, Steve was in a kind of low place and he was like, oh, I don't know what the hell's going on with this. Like, you know, I'm a good mind to go back to college, and because he was studying draftsman. He was going to be a draftsman. And he said, I think, you know, I'm going to head back to college and one thing and another. And that was how it was left. And we kind of just went our separate ways. I didn't hear from him and I didn't follow it up either. And lo and behold, you know, the next thing that I knew was that they'd got a new drummer and away they went. So, but by that time I had joined Samson, and Thunderstick had been born. And it was, you know, I managed to get front cover of the publication Sounds.
Yeah.
And it brought a lot of attention to Samson, which was good. And and we went on from there, really.
And again, Samson gave us Bruce Dickinson.
Bruce Dickinson and Clive Burr. And
Yeah.
Clive Burr.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Clive and I actually changed places. I was with Maiden whilst he was with Samson. And we literally changed places. I went to Samson, he went to Maiden. And we actually, you know, right in the early days, I believe he still had his drum cases with Samson stenciled on them. And I still had Iron Maiden stenciled on mine, which was a bit weird. But yeah, I mean, by that time we'd kind of met up again because Samson, we had the Heavy Metal Crusade.
Mm.
And the management of Samson were putting that actual tour together, and they were looking for support bands. And I suggested Maiden because I'd been in the band, and I said, yeah, I mean, they're a great band and they'd be really, really good. So we went out as a 3-band package: Angel Witch, Iron Maiden and Samson. And after that tour, the Christmas of 1979, I suddenly got a phone call from Steve Harris. And he said, hello, Steve here. And I went, Steve who? And he went, Harris, you idiot. Would you fancy coming back to Maiden? And they had just, this is before Clive, they had just parted company with Dougie Samson because he unfortunately had something wrong with his hands. And what was happening was that when he was playing and touring, the sound engineer, this is how it was told to me, that the sound engineer would start with his faders, you know, on his drums quite low. And by the end of the gig, the faders were right at the very top of the board and they couldn't get any more volume out of him. And that was because he was getting weak and he wasn't hitting the drums in the same way. And so that for me was a real dilemma because, as I said, you know, I was with Samson. I'd already got Sounds and Thunderstick had been born. Steve didn't want Thunderstick. They just wanted me.
Yeah.
And it ruined my Christmas that year. It really did. And I said, well, look, I'll tell you what, why don't we get a rehearsal studio together after Christmas and I'll come down and have a play. And that's what happened. And I've got it all in my diaries of the time that I was keeping. And by the time we did about the 4th or 5th song, it was quite inevitable that I wasn't right for it. because my style of drumming had changed quite a lot. I was a lot more flamboyant and I was putting a lot more in, whereas Steve wanted that bass and drums unity. They wanted just to sit, he wants to drum like Nico, really. I mean, Nico is not a drummer, and I say this in the best possible way I can say it. There is no way do I put down anything that Nico does, because he's a great drummer. But he plays for Iron Maiden. He plays for Steve, and they just stick together, and that's what Steve wanted. Whereas I was kind of, branching out a lot more and was a lot more flamboyant. And that was to be seen after we had recorded Head On. You could see by my drumming that, by what I mean there, it was a lot more, I had a lot more flair to it than Steve wanted. So, fourth or fifth song that we'd done. And when I was with them first time round, the majority of the material that we did all ended up on the first two albums, the Iron Maiden first album and then Killers, So I knew the material, and by that time they were looking at doing the new song they'd written was Running Free, and I did that with them, and I went back, and yet again it was quite plain to see that I wasn't right, and I thanked everybody and hoped that I didn't waste their time. And then we were in Kingsway, which was Ian Gillan's studio. We were recording there, Samson this is, and a phone went, and John McCoy from Gillan, who was producing the album, and I think by that time, it was Survivors, so John answered the phone in the studio and came back and went, guess what? I've just found out who the new Iron Maiden drummer is. And we went, okay, who is it? And sure enough, it was Clive. And that was it. So we'd actually, swapped places. But very incestuous. As you say, it's rock and roll, isn't it? It's so incestuous. Everybody...
Especially back then, with everybody toing and froing in each other's bands, trying to find where metal and rock was going. Really,
exactly.
Punk was in and out, and it was a crazy time, but a very productive time at the same time.
It was hence New Wobham that came out of that.
Absolutely. And you moved on from Samson now, and you branched out on your own, to form your own band called Thunderstick, which I do remember well. And some of the songs on that I thought were incredible. It was just straight ahead, hard rock. And brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.
What are your memories of back then? Was it as straightforward as it seemed? Or?
No. Unfortunately, because of the publicity that I had picked up, I was able to generate publicity for the new band. But with a big B, it was very hard, because at the time I actually joined Bernie Torme's band, Electric Gypsies, and I was with him for 5 minutes or so, but it was the same old thing, that the music press got hold of it and said, this is Thunderstick without the mask with Bernie Torme. And they still wanted to talk about the fact that I was Thunderstick as well as Bernie. And it just wasn't, it wasn't right, because Bernie and I were, we remained friends right the way up until when he died, God bless him. But he wanted a drummer that didn't demand too much attention, because it was, it was Bernie's band.
Bernie, at the end of the day.
But in the meantime, the bass player that I had worked with numerous other bands prior to joining Maiden, when I came back from Sicily, because I was living out there and touring with the band out there. And when I came back, I joined various other bands, and but there was a folk rock band, which was a little bit like Steel Ice Band, I suppose. I joined a band, Archer, and they'd never had a drummer before, and they'd had a singer that played congas, and that was it. So I joined them, and I struck up a really good relationship with the bass player. We both left and carried on our playing relationship. I formed a band with him called Oz. We had a keyboard player, and we could never find the guitarist, so that was all fits and starts. It never really materialized. And then when I came about thinking about Thunderstick, I said to him, I'm going to put a band together now. And he said, great, so we started looking at people. But in the meantime, the press still wanted to generate something about me. And I got a double page spread in Melody Maker, and there was all kinds of stuff. It's taken Thunderstick a hell of a long time to actually get his band together, and it was mooted that I was going to call it Thunderstick's Lightning and all these kind of things. So I had the press before I had the band, which was totally wrong. So it was really hard. And when we did actually get together and I got a band together, I had unfortunately kind of shot myself in the foot regarding the press, because it was hard to get press, because they went, oh no, you're not having us on again, that you got this band and that never materialized. So yes, it was hard. I found financial investment because I was broke. I managed to find financial investment, and we went in, and I wrote the 4-track EP, Feel Like Rock and Roll, which Feel Like Rock and Roll, Alicia, Buried Alive, and there was one other track, Run Around. By that time, I really thought about putting a female vocalist at the front. The reason I did that was twofold, because I thought it would be novel. And I don't mean that in a disparaging way at all.
No, not at all.
It was because there were female bands like Rock Goddess and Girl School and Cheetah. No, what was the other band? Cheetah, I think. But there were not any bands that had a female vocal that were male orientated rock band.
Yeah. And
the reason being, as I said, was twofold. First of all, with Samson, the Thunderstick mask was very stark. And at the time, there was a women's lib group, women's activists were really strong in the UK. I don't know whether you remember, whether you're old enough.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And they were really quite critical of the whole Thunderstick thing, saying that unfortunately there was a guy that was named or dubbed the Cambridge Rapist. And he wore a mask that was somewhat similar to my Thunderstick mask. And so the women's lib group got hold of that. And with Samson, they were ripping down posters. They were protesting outside some of our gigs, and it all got ridiculous. I asked them to come on the radio, and so that we could have a frank and open discussion. But they didn't. They declined. So it never happened. So I thought it would be great to put a female vocalist, because if I get any of the same kind of flack that I'd already received because of the mask, I could just go talk to her. I always view Thunderstick not as a nasty, evil character at all. For me, the Thunderstick image was always a kind of knockabout type of. It wasn't comical. I didn't want it to be comical. I wanted it to be, have a good, strong stage persona, but it was just that. It was a stage persona with nothing, no ulterior motives and no hidden agenda or anything like that. And then when I did put Thunderstick together, I thought, I'm going to change the way that the mask looked. And so I put together the mask that I am still to this day wearing. Oh my God. Yeah. Little did I know that back then, in those days, that when I reached the ripe old age of I would still be doing it. But here I am, and I am still doing it. So, but that's the way I did it. And I softened the mask and the image. And by then I'd had one female vocalist who had done some demos with me. She was really good, but she fell in love with somebody that was on the periphery. He was in the music business, but he wasn't a musician or anything. I think he worked for a publishing company or whatever. And he said, come on, leave that band and I will make you, I will show you the world type of thing. And so that was it. She went, I found another singer called Anna Marie Carmela Borg, which was her real name, believe it or not. And she did the EP with me. So she is the vocal on that EP, Feel Like Rock and Roll. But she lost her voice. And we were putting together a tour and rehearsing for that tour, and she lost her voice, and it kept on happening. And I just said, look, Anna, I don't know what to do about this. I'm really kind of beside myself. So I said, I'm going to have to let you go, darling, really. And it was all perfectly amicable. She totally agreed. And I said, I will, however, keep your voice on the 4-track EP because it was already ready to be released. It was all scheduled for release. And put another advert in and enter Jodie Valentine. And so Jodie did the tour. She joined the band, did the tour, even though it wasn't her voice that was on that EP. And we managed to get out and tour. Yeah.
Which, bringing us more or less up to date. I mean, your last album was the really rather excellent, I've got to say, Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was from 2017, which I think we did an email-based interview on the release of that. Yeah,
I did do a lot of interviews for that, I must admit, because it was such a long time coming. And it was all because of Jodie's. I don't know whether you got a copy of it, because I explained it all in the sleeve notes for it.
Yeah.
I'd found out that Jodie had died, and she suffered from early Alzheimer's disease.
Such a shame.
And she'd been in a care-assisted home for 5 years with it. And it just suddenly came out of the blue. This musician in the States, when I released the I hadn't released the album. I'd put together an album called Echoes from the Analog Asylum, and that was because an American label contacted me and said, have you ever thought about putting out your back catalogue? And I said, no, not really, but yeah, I'm interested. So we did that. I remastered everything. I called it Echoes from the Analog Asylum because every track that was on it had been recorded in analog rather than digital.
School.
Yeah, old school. And remastered it all, and we put it out with the label. And that is when I heard about Jodie, because the guy in the States, the record label owner, he said, is there any way that I can get hold of Jodie Valentine? And I said, well, it's been a long time. We party company, because obviously at the time we had been married as well. She was my wife. And, it was the old adage that you can't work together and maintain a relationship, especially in a volatile environment such as the music industry.
Yeah,
and it took its toll on us. It really did. And we both went our separate ways. And I found out from him, because he turned around and said, I've contacted Jodie Valentine, but my God, she's really out there, isn't she? And I said, how do you mean? He said, well, she's kind of all over the place, man. All I wanted to do was get an interview off her about the old material and what have you. And he said it was really like trying to get blood from a stone. And he said she's really, really out there. And obviously it was because she was suffering from early onset of Alzheimer's. And by the time that I put it out, I then at a later date, many years later, found out from this guy who had bought the album, and he was a musician himself, and he'd been visiting her in this home. And he took the Echoes from the Analog Asylum album in to try and play to her, and she didn't even recognize her own voice.
Oh.
And it was like, whoa, that floored me. It really did. And so I thought, there was so much material that we had played live and we demoed, but was never actually officially released. And so I thought, you know what, I've got to do this. I'm going to put an album together. And that was purely and simply the whole reasoning behind doing an album, was so that I was able to address all the tracks that we had done. And so I started trying to find a vocalist. the guy that owned the studio that, funny enough, I used to go to school with, and he was in, oh Christ, where was it? Herefordshire. And I told him the situation, and he said, "You've got to come to my studio and record it there. You know, I can do you a great deal and one thing and another. And I've got somewhere that, you know, we've got facilities to be able to board so the band could come and stay and one thing." And I said, "Well, there is no band. It's just me at the moment." So I started looking. He said, "Right, I'm going to look for a vocalist." He found one, and enter Lucy V is on that album. The amount of people that, it was very strange because it was very chalk and cheese. There were lots of people that really loved her voice and thought she was great, and then other people that got back to me and said, "I don't like your vocalist at all. She sounds like a guy, and she doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the material." So unbeknownst to me, the guy who owned the studio told her that we would be doing in the excess of 50 festivals a year, and that there was no money to be had from the recording of the album. However, the live work would bear fruit and be able to finance her from that. And I didn't know about this. I didn't know about the fact that he said, "Oh yeah, they've got all these festivals and what have you." And it all came to a head, and I kind of paid her off and just said, "Okay, you know, let's just call it a session. Thank you very much. Here's some money. Bye bye." And that's how it was. So I had a bass player by then. Funny enough, I met Rex, the bass player, through a Steve Harris gig. He came to where I live and was playing with British Lion, and I went along and saw him. And next day on Facebook, somebody contacted me and said, "Oh, we were standing behind you at the bar at Steve Harris's gig." And my mate, who's a bass player, was too, well, not scared, but he was just a little bit, you know, intimidated by the fact that I was standing there in front of him, which is ridiculous. Because he tells me, he says all kinds of things to me now, and it's far from intimidated these days, that's for sure. Anyway, so I contacted him and said, "I'm looking at actually recording an album." This was pre Something Wicked, and originally it was going to be John McCoy, and but John was actually at the time was in ill health, and so I sent him all the demos and everything, and he was putting together, you know, bass tracks for it, but it never materialized. And I got hold of Rex and said, "Do you fancy coming along and having a play?" And he did, and hence the reason that he ended up on the Something Wicked album, and he's now still with me to this day. So yeah, so that was it. It was all kind of very confusing and what have you, but as you rightly said earlier, you know, typical rock and roll. It's
absolutely
it's never a straight clear cut path, isn't it?
It's always a very fluid thing, and rightfully so. So
fluid, great word for it. Yeah.
So let's bring things right up to date.
Okay.
For you now,
yep.
Where are you at now? Where's Thunderstick now?
Yeah, Thunderstick. I've been recording another album.
Good.
It's been a long time in the coming, because unfortunately I started it just before lockdown, and we had to do, instead of doing it in a studio and playing in a studio, I had to do it remotely with everybody, and it's taken a long time because everybody's recording facilities are very different from each other. And so I have like a guitar track that is very kind of brittle and metallic, and another guitar track that is mellow, and one thing and another. And it's just really hard to try and unify everything so that it sounds like a proper album, if you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Rather than, you know, these various tracks that have been all cobbled together to make an album, I want it to be have a consistency about it.
Of course.
that it's a proper album.
Mhm.
So that has been taking forever and a day. And yet again, money is the issue, as it always is.
Yeah.
And so I've got all the tracks recorded for that album, but it's just ongoing. And I hope and pray. I've put the release date back so many times, and I'm hoping that it will be released by February of next year, and it will be a proper Thunderstick album. I think the material on it is really strong. I really believe in the songs, and I hope that, you know, eventually when it does see the light of day, that the people that hear it will agree with me that it's a very strong album in its you know, in its what's the word I'm looking for. I just think that it's probably one of the best things that I've done, and I want it to be really, really good. So that's why I'm taking my time with it. So, but I have a band. I have an ongoing band. I've worked with a lot of musicians. There's a lot of people that have come and go through the ever revolving doors of Thunderstick guitarists due to one thing and another, COVID being one, ill health being another, impatience by another guitarist who didn't really want to spend the time, you know, sitting around waiting for me to go, yeah, we're ongoing. And so he left. And I've got guest artists on the album, which is really great. I've got a guy called Dave John Ross, who was with a band called Moore. He's put some wonderful guitar work down. I've got Dave Kilford, who was an ex-Thunderstick guitarist back in the 80s. And the singer that I've got, I think, is just remarkable. She's a great singer. I think, you know, talking about Jodie, obviously Jodie has a very special place in my heart, both performance-wise and stage ability. But with the vocalist I have at the moment, Raven Blackwing, my God, she is incredible. She really is. So yes, we're working. We've done a handful of gigs recently, one of them being the 40th anniversary show that we did at the Cart and Horses, which is the birthplace of Iron Maiden.
Absolutely.
And so I apparently played it back in the day with Maiden when the music venue was actually in the pub. I don't remember it. It's a long, long time ago. I might have done, I might not. I haven't got a clue. But yeah, we did the 40th anniversary, and Vinnie Munro, the very first vocalist I had back in the day, she came along and did a couple of songs with us because she did the first marquee gig with me, which was the 5th of August, 1982. And yeah, we've celebrated it, and I had some people come along. I had Paul Lewis from Satan's Empire. He was an ex-guitarist, Thunderstick guitarist as well, so he came along, and Terry Watpram came along, who was the guitarist in Maiden when I was in Maiden in '77.
Right, yeah.
He came along, and we did a couple of Maiden songs. We did Running Free and Drifter, and that was great. It really was. It was a great night. It was really good. So yes, we're just about to do not this week, but the following week we're doing Cornwall ROX, a festival, and that is it for live work for this year. But I'm starting to put work in next year. We're going to be doing the British Steel Festival in Fimes in France, which we've done before. In fact, I had it recorded and we put it out as a live album, Thunderstick live album, which was really well received. It was a limited edition, and it didn't go out on a major label or anything like that. I just did a limited pressing, and fortunately sold all those, which was great. So I'm thinking about maybe a repress of it somewhere along the line.
Good idea.
Yeah, could be. But we're doing that next year, and there's a fantastic festival that's quite local to me in Kent called the A New Day Festival, and we've done that twice before, and we're going back to do it again next summer. So I'm hoping to put a headline tour as well together, but it's all money.
Absolutely.
I mean, the whole thing. I know I keep coming back to that same thing,
It's
but
true though.
the kind of world that we live in at the moment is just insane, isn't it? It's so
crazy.
hard for bands, and yet, you know, I see things because of social media. I see things on Facebook, and you think that really at the end of the day, Thunderstick, I should be out there doing the same circuit as all the other bands at the time. You know, Diamond Head, and you know,
absolutely, yeah.
What have you, all those kind of bands that are the new Wobbin bands that are still out on the circuit.
Yeah, still kicking ass.
I know, but I find it really hard to try and find promoters who are willing to put together a tour. They don't exist anymore. In the old days, you know, they were promoters in every sense of the word. They used to do the promotion, they used to do the advertising for it.
Yeah, no, it's down to you, the artists, to put it together.
Yeah. You don't get promoters calling a band up and saying, we'd like to put some gigs together with you. It's all about the artist now trying to persuade promoters that, you know, you would be right for wherever it is that they book. And 9 times out of 10, they want to give you a pitiful fee. And it is really hard. As well as that, people are just, they don't really want to come to gigs at the moment. Have you found that?
Yeah. Gigs that you would have thought would have sold out like that.
Yeah. Unless you're a big band that warrants, you know, whereas the old days you used to get a really good audience, whereas now I see that bands are traveling miles and miles and spending fortune on diesel and one thing and another. They get there and they're playing to 15, 20 people.
It's heartbreaking. It really is.
It is. But that's the way of the world at the moment that we live in, you know.
But ending on a positive note, is there anything you'd like to say to your many, many fans out there?
I would like to say thank you very much for sticking with me over all these years, you know.
You always will.
And I mean, we are very theatrical in what we still do. I've always loved Alice Cooper, one of my all-time heroes, and so I always wanted to be theatrical in my band. I love the Tubes as well, White Punks on Dope and all that. And I just want to continue doing it, and I'm really hoping that we can get out there and play to those many fans that have stuck with me. We have our own, if I can plug my Thunderstick.
Plug away.
Well, there is Thunderstick Facebook page, and there's the Thunderstick Stormtroopers Facebook page as well, which is a fan-based site that they can get on, and so they can interact with the band, which is, I think, vital these days.
Yeah.
It is really vital to be able to converse with people that support you. And you know, I hesitate to use the word fans, but I suppose it's good. But I've always looked on them more as supporters of the band, you know, people that have really stuck with it and have enjoyed what I've done. And all I can say is thank you so much for that.
Thank you for the music.
Thank you. It's great.
Right, I'll say goodbye then, Thunderstick, and keep banging them drums and keep the faith, dude.
Let me know when it comes out.
Will do, and we'll put the links in the description.
Brilliant. Okay. You take care.
You too, my love. Bye-bye.
Bye. See ya.